Hello, right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the webinar today. We're going to get started now because there's quite a lot to get through, and I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to hear everything. Hopefully, a few more people will start joining over the next minute or two, but I think now's a good time to get started. So I want to introduce Shazia Janai and Ian Forrester from Neuro Insight and Whaler to help to the webinar of the science of influencers. So hopefully that's what you're all expecting to hear about, and it should be, so that's good. The guys are going to take you through the presentation. It should last for most of the time, but there will be opportunity at the end for us to have a Q&A. So if you can all, as is the case with all of our webinars, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you select that and submit your questions, then at the end, when the presentation's finished, I will talk through some of the questions, and hopefully we'll get through them all. But if not, we will we'll do our best to get answers retrospectively. So the subject is science of influencers, and the more and more brands, as you know, are investing in influencer marketing, but there's little research out there which tells us whether it really works. So in this, we're going to piece that some of you may have seen at Quirks, and hopefully there's an opportunity for you to have reflected on that if you had seen it at Quirks. Explore what happens in the brain when people are viewing Instagram content from micro or macro celebrity influencers, and how that compares to ads on TV, Facebook, etc. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the guys and let them take the presentation away.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. So I'm Shazia, I'm the CEO of Neuro Insight, and I'm joined today by my good pal somewhere in the distance, Ian Forrester, who I'll let introduce himself as well.
Hey guys, I head up research and analytics at Whaler.
So we're going to be tag teaming a bit, obviously being in different locations. I'll start by just saying I hope everyone who's listening is safe and well, and not losing their minds too much from self-isolating, and hopefully this will inspire you to think about something besides how much longer we're going to have to all be in our houses. So I'll get cracking. I'm going to start with just a couple of slides just to detail a bit about what we do, so I'll let Ian go first.
So just to give you guys an introduction to Whaler, who are we and why do we have a right to talk about this stuff? Well, we're an influencer marketing agency. We've run a bunch of campaigns with lots of major brands, as you can see, in tons of different markets. We're also official partners of Facebook, Instagram and Snapchat, which from an insight point of view is pretty cool because it means it gives me and my team access to a bunch of cool data, which not a lot of people have access to.
Okay. And at Neuro Insight, we're basically a specialist agency that measures subconscious brain response. And there's just a few clients there who we work with. And, you know, within the list of people that we work with, we're asked to do a lot of work looking at content. So understanding how creatively effective something is, because of the way that we measure, we can tap into sort of the seat of decision making, the seat of human truth. So understanding how to optimize content is really powerful. But in addition to that, a lot of the work that we are doing over the last couple of years has been around the impact of the context within which it's viewed. So for people like Newsworks, who we worked with, where we looked into the impact of hard news versus soft news, how your advertising is taken in, which at the moment is an incredibly topical subject. You know, we've done loads of stuff looking at context there, and even things like Radio Centre, what we did looking at context there, and priming impact, stuff like that. So when we partnered with Whaler, it was to look at exactly that, the context of influencer.
Awesome. So let me just tell you a little bit, guys, about where this study came from. So a couple of years ago, I was still working at video ad tech company Unruly. And I started to notice the growth of influencer marketing. And it's pretty ridiculous when you think about it. It's only really been in existence for about 3 years, but already it's predicted to be worth about $21 billion by 2021. So insane amount of growth. Money's pouring into the space. And anecdotally, marketers are reporting that it's working wonders for their brands. But as an insight person, I thought to myself, well, this is really interesting. Is there any data which I can look at to understand why influencer is working? Like, what is there in the market? I started to look around, and honestly, I was pretty shocked to find that there was, particularly a couple of years ago, it's better now, but back then there was very, very little data to enable anyone to understand why it was working. Literally, people were making stats up as far as I could see, like a reach number for a campaign, for example, shown as the total combined followers of the influencers in that campaign, which is a little bit ridiculous because you're never going to reach all of the followers of your influencers. And even if you do, there's going to be overlap between the audiences of influencers. So to present that combined follower number as a reach number is a bit ridiculous just in itself. So I thought to myself, there's a big opportunity here. And I moved to Wales about a year ago. And since then, we've been doing a lot of work to bring some proper rigor to the measurement of influencer campaigns. And the first step on this journey was just getting our basic house in order. And that meant hooking into official APIs, like the Instagram Graph API, for example, to get basic numbers, the actual numbers from the horse's mouth, to report on our campaigns. So this is a big job, actually, and it's not a particularly easy thing to do because you need to get your influencers to give you access to their business accounts. You run the API calls on their behalf. You bring that data into a database. You create norms, you create visualizations. There's a bunch of work that needs to go into this. But even after you've done all of that stuff, you end up with pretty basic, fundamental, yes, but basic metrics. How many people did I reach? How many impressions did I generate? In terms of how people are responding to content, the numbers are pretty basic. So you have likes, numbers of comments, numbers of saves, numbers of 3-second video views. Now, this is a good start. Like understanding that how many likes that a post has generated is a good start. But to really understand why influencer is working, we need to go a lot further than what the standard APIs will share now. And I had a couple of hypotheses that influencer, when done well, and that's a big caveat there, like, because a lot of influencer marketing is just not done very well. So when I say when done well, I mean creative, so very creative posts done by authentic influencers who live by certain values. When done well, those influencer posts are very emotive, so they have a strong emotional response and they're very memorable. Now, those are the two hypotheses that I wanted to test with this study, and if you want to test those things, then there really is no better place to go in the market than to call up my mate Shazia, because Shazia, if you move on to the next slide, the key driver of action here is the creation of memories. So this is a really nice quote by Maya Angelou. People forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So I've got a ton of research from my unruly days around the power of emotions in advertising. I can kind of bore you guys to till the cows come home with this kind of data, but this encapsulates the method of action. If you, as a brand, can make someone feel an intense positive emotional response, a consumer then attaches that positive emotional response to your brand, and upon the point of purchase, when the consumer is choosing between brands, they might not remember the content itself or the exact message, but they remember the way you made them feel. So emotions drive memories, which then drive action, which then result in sales ultimately. And if you want to test emotions and memory, like I was saying, the best place to go to in the market, in my view, is to Neuro Insight. Pick up the phone to my mate Shazia, because they have some pretty awesome metrics when it comes to emotions and memory.
Okay, right. So I'll take you through kind of how we do this in terms of the tech itself and what we can therefore measure. So we use a proprietary technology called steady state topography, which some of you may be familiar with. Now, SST works, it's quite similar to EEG in some ways, and it measures electrical activity, but EEG, which is used by some research agencies, there's a lot of noise in the data. You know, you have to have one person in the room at a time, you have to have it quite isolated, You have to take multiple readings in order to account for the noise in the data. But SST was created in a way that helps to remove all of those issues, I guess, that allow you to be able to conduct research in a really natural environment and in a way that gives you much more robust readings. Now, in addition to it being just a great method, rooted in kind of academic work by our founder, Richard Silverstone, who's a neuroscience professor based in Melbourne, that one of the things that makes it commercially incredibly actionable are the things that we measure within the brain. So our brains are incredibly specialized. They have different areas which are responsible for different cognitive functions. And those little sensors you can see on the headsets, they relate to those different areas in the brain. So some of those images you see there on the side, they show our metrics. So we'll start with memory and coding, because as Ian mentioned, obviously for brands, it's incredibly important to have your brand being memorable. But 90% of our decision making happens in the subconscious. So when somebody consciously recalls something, when they articulate it through more conventional research methodologies, they're tapping into a very small part of what it actually exists in their brains. So what we're measuring here is at a subconscious level, what your brain is storing into its long-term memory. And long-term memory has been proven to be correlated directly with future action, decision-making, and behavior change. So we measure memory both from a left and right brain point of view. Your left brain is where your speech capability develops, and it's where we process really detailed information. So kind of detailed words, phrases, pictures, any kind of granular information. But right brain memory response is also incredibly critical. That's where we take in the big picture, the overall feel of something, colours, tones, and sometimes sound as well. So memory is super important. But as Ian showed through that really beautiful quote by Maya Angelou, that memory drives emotion. Usually when I'm presenting in front of a live audience, I would ask you all to raise your hands if you've seen the film Inside Out, the Disney film. I can't see any of you today, so if any of you haven't watched it, now's the time in isolation. It's a great film. But that film was, the guys at Disney made that, and they did speak to neuroscientists when they made it, because it's about these little people inside a little girl's head, and they're all coloured depending on which emotion they are, and the analogy is real. All of our memories are coloured by emotion, and the reason for that is it's evolutionary. So they're mechanisms of our survival and our growth and development. So it just goes to show just how important emotion actually is. Now we measure different regions of the brain that relate to emotion. So one of them there is emotional intensity. So that's a bit at the back of the brain. It's a very visceral, instinctive response. It measures the strength of the emotion that we feel. Personal relevance there, or we also call it engagement. That is a measure of something that feels of relevance to you. Again, both emotional intensity and personal relevance, they're drivers of what goes into memory. If your brain sees something like pictures of members of your family or brands that you love, there's a part of your brain that will fire up, and it will therefore feel that information is important and will want to encode it into its long-term memory. The other emotional measure that we have there is approach and withdrawal. Now, this is not a driver of what goes into memory, but this tells us about whether or not something is taking the consumer or the respondent on the appropriate emotional journey. So it tells us about the polarity of the emotional response, the direction of it. It's literally a mechanism in your brain that's saying, do I want to lean towards this, or do I want to take a step back? The other one there is attention. So we measure visual attention, which is as it sounds, how visually stimulating something is. So that's a little bit about our metrics. I'm going to pass on to Ian again now, and he'll take you through what we actually did when it came to the research together.
Thanks, Shazia. Can I just say, from a client's point of view, thinking about Shazia's methodology and thinking about System 1 and System 2, like it really is the purest way to measure these things. Like, you are literally going straight to the source of truth. So there are lots of cool, like System 1 type metrics you can measure. Like facial coding is brilliant. I've used it a lot. Eye tracking, you know, sort of more obscure ones, galvanic skin response, etc. But all of these things are controlled by the brain. So when you work with Neuro Insight, you get straight to the heart of the matter, so to speak. And it cuts out a bunch of noise and really is the truest system one response, which is why I, as a client, decided to use those guys for this particular study. Now, this is the science of influence of them. This is the results of the study. Just to talk a little bit about what we tested and how we tested it in order to produce the results you're about to see. We had 3 cells of research. So we had micro-influencers, so followers of micro-influencers. So we're looking at micro-influencer content. And we're defining micro-influencer as between 10 and 100,000 followers. We had a macro-influencer follower cell. And macros we're defining as having between 100 and 500,000 followers. And we had a celebrity cell, and they were following celebrities. So we had John Boyega in there, Cara Delevingne, for example, like celebrities. And you'll see some of the content in a second. Now, it's really, really important to point out here that we didn't just cherry pick like the worst TV, YouTube, or Facebook content we could find to juxtapose with the influencer content just to make a point and show a good story. Also, to be included in this research, content had to be part of the same campaign. So we tested 6 brand campaigns here, all of which had an influencer component, both micro or macro and celebrity influencer. And they also had a TV, YouTube, and Facebook component. So in that way, we're controlling for brand, we're controlling for message, and we're looking at the different types of content delivered across that campaign on the different types of media. Shazzy, can you go on to the next slide? So just to illustrate this a little bit, Vodafone were part of the test, for example, and we put into this test these examples of content here. So on the left, Shazzy, if you could play that video.
You have the power to roam freely. Vodafone eliminates roaming charges in Europe. Discover our new red plans. Vodafone, power to you.
So a fairly standard Vodafone ad that aired on TV. It was also shown on YouTube. It's about a dude looking around for data when he's traveling. If we can compare that to our micro-influencer post, which had the same message, but was delivered in a very different way. So the same message there, that delivered in what in my view is a more creative kind of way. It's got a very playful tone. It's shot beautifully. It's a little bit jerky when played over a webinar, but it's really beautifully shot. And when you consider Outside Books did that herself, it's a very professionally shot piece. On the right hand side there, we have the moment behind. This is just an image, so we can't play that one. But just again, to give another flavor of the influencer content that's going into this test, that was shot in Malta. So that's taking a picture of the famous Maltese red telephone boxes. Malta, of course, was part of Commonwealth. And the moment behind there is talking about the fact that she's been a Vodafone customer for ages, and she loves their roaming plans because they're very generous. So it's a very authentic post, but also it's combining that authenticity with a beautiful creative shot there.
Okay, right. So let's look at some of the data we got out the back of this. Now, as Ian was saying, we looked not just at Instagram content, but also at content on other sort of media platforms. Now, the reason we did this was because we were, trying to understand not just influencer, but influencer across the context, that context piece that I mentioned at the start. And the other thing to note is one of the pieces of work that we've done prior, we've done this for Ocean Outdoor and Out of Home, we've done it for Royal Mail on direct mail, is that we look at priming impacts as well, because we understand that clients will have, campaigns that go across multiple media platforms, and it's getting really hard for us to know where to spend our cash these days. There's so much choice, it's a really complex media landscape. So understanding how things fit in that mix and the truth behind priming, that's really tough to measure, and thankfully, because we're measuring the subconscious, it's something that we can do with reasonable ease. So I'm just going to show you now the results that we got. So first we'll be comparing influencer ads with TV, Facebook and YouTube ads. And I will start with this. It's looking at influencer being micro and macro, so this is not with the celebrity included. And this shows what we call our heat map. So this shows the levels of brain activity whilst they're viewing TV ads and influencer ads. So blue, where the blue colour is, that's where the activity is lower, or red and pink there, that's where the activity is higher. If you broadly look at the response, you can see there's quite a big difference. So the response to TV ads, it's generally weaker. There's more blue and green there compared to the influencer ads, where you're seeing a lot more red and pink. So what this is telling us is that the brain is a lot more active. The brain is a lot more engaged. It's kind of taking in a lot more information, processing a lot more information when it's viewing those influencer campaigns. And when we quantify this, just to sort of get more of a flavour for what this means in terms of our metrics, we found that there was an uplift in emotional intensity of 277% on those influencer ads, and that's how much more emotive they were than TV, and they were 87% more memorable. So it's such a massive kind of difference in terms of what we're seeing with brain response. So if we then go and look at the influencer ads and their comparison to Facebook as well, we see again a much greater rise in emotional intensity at 64%. But the interesting thing is actually the memory encoding figure. Now, we've done quite a lot of work where we've looked at Facebook in the past, and one of the things that we do see is that content, advertising content in particular, can feel quite intrusive somewhere like Facebook. Instagram does tend to be a little bit better, but influencer content, where it's really interesting, is influencer does feel a little bit more like it belongs in your world, because it doesn't feel as jarring, I guess, versus other content. And Instagram is a kind of platform where this does work incredibly well. So we're seeing that influencer ads are much more emotive and memorable than those Facebook ads. So we also looked at YouTube. Again, we saw that influencer ads were significantly more emotive and memorable than YouTube ads, with a 28% increase in emotional intensity and 73% increase in memory encoding. Now, if we then go and look at priming effect, because as I said, this is something that's super important for us to take into account. We know that, all's not lost for TV, Facebook and YouTube. I mean, they are still incredibly valid platforms. But we did also measure kind of priming effect of influencer on those formats. So we compared the responses to TV, Facebook and YouTube of the people who had first been exposed to an influencer ad for the same brand versus those who had not. And what we found was you can see it's a spider chart, so all of our metrics are shown here. And you can see that influencer priming actually improves the response to TV, Facebook, and YouTube ads. So what you can see is that purple bit in the middle there, that's where they've seen the content on TV, YouTube, and Facebook, but without any influencer content priming beforehand. Whereas the grey box there shows that the results for brain response after they've been primed. Now what we're seeing here is that you're getting much higher levels of memory, so the content is more memorable, it's being encoded and therefore can drive future action, decision making, any behaviour change, purchase intent. But in addition to that, we're getting this really positive emotional response. Now why that's important is what we need is for something to go in people's heads, and what you want is for them to have a motivation, a positive motivation off the back of it. And that's essentially the impact that priming with influencer content before they're seeing branded content on TV, Facebook, and YouTube does. Now, what we're going to move on to next is celebrity, because so far what we showed you is influencer content, so it's micro and macro influencers. But celebrities were also, there was a celebrity cell included as well. And we've kept the results of that a little bit separate because they are a bit different. So I'm going to hand over to Ian now and he'll take you through that. I have also noticed we've had a couple of Q&A questions come in. So the first one there, I'll answer this now actually because it's probably a good time to do it before we move on to celebrity. So somebody has asked, it would be great to see some of the sample sizes used here. Excellent question. So with Neuro Research, we have our neuroscientists in Australia do all the statistical work to check what a robust sample size is on this sort of work that we do. And we never report on less than a minimum of 50 people because we know that's the threshold for getting robustness in our results. In this instance, I'll have to check the exact number, but we had, you know, for any priming sort of cell, any data that was reported back, it was an absolute minimum of 50. We have more than 50 on everything that was used. The second question we've got there is, are you able to share a bit about who the respondents were in this study? Was it representative of the brands who have targeted or younger, more influence engaged audience? Another great question. So when we recruited for this study, we recruited people who followed a bunch of influencers. So we were looking for, because obviously we're showing influencer content. If you're showing influencer content and you show it to people who frankly couldn't care less and aren't engaged in that influencer, then it's irrelevant. But the way we designed this study was we had several influencers who prepared content for the study. So we had a lovely mixture. And we had within the cells people who followed certain influencers, but also people who didn't, because we were looking at a few different things as part of the research. One was around follower versus non-follower response. The other thing was around congruence of the actual content. So we created some really incongruent content as well to look at for those people who do follow a specific influencer. If they see something that doesn't match up to what they're used to, whether that has some sort of wonky impact on the brain. So the audience was a relevant audience for this. We did not do NatRep because that would have swayed the results and it wouldn't have been actionable in terms of the outcome. And the last question before I hand over to Ian is quite a big one. What proportion of your media budget would you recommend spending on influencer priming ahead of brand comms? Wow, that's quite a question. Ian, I might let you take that one because you're the influencer expert.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate that. I mean, so what our study has shown is that there is an impact of priming, right? So if someone sees an influencer post promoting a particular product prior to seeing the TV, YouTube, or Facebook content, then they're going to respond positively to that TV, YouTube, and Facebook content as a result of having been initially primed by that influencer. In terms of how to split the budget, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting question. I think what this is showing is that influencer can be used very effectively in kind of that brand building upper funnel type way, the kind of way that Burnett and Field talk about when they talk about the 60-40 split. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the work that those guys over at the IPA do, but they talk about when you're considering your media budgets, you should spend 60% on long-term brand building. Like this is the emotive type pieces. This is the perception generators, which influencer marketing absolutely is. And then 40% on more the product focused activity, so the short-term sales stuff. Now, what we're proving here is that influencer definitely sits within that 60%. It can definitely also sit in the 40%. So if hopefully that helps. I think it really depends. The exact numbers are going to depend on how much you're spending on TV, who you're reaching with TV. Certainly people are going to respond better to that TV ad if they've seen an influencer ad prior to that TV ad. So it's going to depend on the TV budget as well.
Yeah, it's also quite category specific. So like in terms of some of the work we've done in the past, where we've done primary work on out of home and direct mail, but I mean, what we saw here was, I mean, the top line, the main message was just the absolute importance of using influencer in the right point within your media planning cycle. But happy to sort of discuss more of this offline because we do have more detail on the work that we've done. But I'll pass over to Ian now for the celebrity cell.
Shazia. Yes, so the last cut we're going to look at is celebrities here. And by celebrity, we mean proper celebrity. So John Boyega, Cara Delevingne, Valtteri Bottas, the F1 driver, we're all involved here. Shazia, could you move the slide on?
Okay.
Thanks. So we're seeing a Neuro Insight spider chart here again. So all of the Neuro Insight metrics around the edge there, and we have the response to celebrity content in blue versus our all platforms browsing in the black line there. So the all platforms browsing / watching is all content throughout the whole of the research. So that's your norm, your average, if you like. So what we're seeing is that blue shape, the response to celebrity content, is really, really big. So it's having a very strong response, much stronger than average, we're tending to see. So it's very, very memorable. That particular left brain memory there is a huge over-index versus average. Also very emotive, that emotional intensity on the right-hand side there is a lot higher emotional intensity we're tending to have. But the really key point on this chart is this approach withdraw metric. So as we saw in our priming chart, that approach withdraw metric there is a polar metric, unlike the others. So approach is positive and withdraw is negative, and there's a point of neutrality in the middle. That point of neutrality is that 0.6 spot there with the orange dot. Anything below that is negative, anything above that is positive. So what we're tending to see, you can see that blue line dips below the 0.6, and I think it actually averages out at about 5.54. So it's below that point of neutrality. So it's tending to be negative. So generally what we're seeing here is that responses to celebrity influencer posts are very memorable, very emotive, but for the wrong reasons, because it's a negative response. Now, the first time I took this out, she presented to L'Oreal in Cannes, and they weren't particularly happy with these results, as you can imagine, because they spend a ton of money on celebrities. So, you know, they made some very valid points about the fact that this can't always be the case. So surely you should be able to use celebrities well and have a decent emotional response, which is perfectly valid. So we started cutting the data a little bit more finely here and looking at individual celebrities. And that revealed a really interesting story. So if we can see on the left there, that chart, so our celebrity posts, their approach withdraw score. Again, the 0.6 in the middle there with the dotted line, that's the point of neutrality. So anything above that is positive, anything below is negative. And the average there at the 0.54, that's where they all netted out. So that's what we saw in our previous chart. But you can see the responses to individual celebrity influencer content was very, very different. So certain ones had a pretty terrible score. So Valtteri Bottas for Martini didn't do very well at all. Estée Lalonde, Oral-B, Leon Bridges for Gap, all below that 0.6 mark where we want them to be above. But 2 posts in particular, so Vogue Williams for Tresemme and John Boyega for Vodafone, were doing very well. They actually had a very positive response. It was very, very emotionally intense, but in a positive way. Really, really important. And when we started to dig into this a little bit further, again, we found the same principles apply. So Shazia, could you play this video?
Are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. The thing about bedtime stories is they work best when you're the hero. When you're the prince or the princess, the one flying into the heart of the sun and rescuing the last dragon in existence, or saving someone you love. That's where DreamLab comes in. It's an app that lets you be the hero simply by using the power of your phone while you sleep. So before you go to bed, plug in your phone to charge, then sleep safe in the knowledge you're helping in the fight against cancer. Heroes don't just live in stories, they're you and me. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So, now it's time to go to bed and sleep like a hero. Good luck.
So that's a really lovely piece of content. Obviously he uses John Boyega, but does so in a really cool and creative way. You also get the feeling that John Boyega actually really cares about this issue and really believes that Vodafone, by using the latent power of these phones, like the processing power just sitting there when people are asleep, that can be used for good in terms of finding a cure for cancer. So it's a very creative post there, a very creative video. It's also very authentic, and those two assets really ring true. Like, it doesn't really matter if a celebrity is being used or not. If that post is very creative and if it's authentic, then it's going to have a very positive response. And then the last one here, we've got Vogue Williams. This is an image, so not a video, but again, it's creative and it's authentic. So she's just had a blow dry from Tresemme. It's a very personal post there. You can see she's absolutely thrilled with her hair, and why wouldn't she be? She looks brilliant. Again, this is quite creative. It's colourful, and it's also very personal and authentic because she's genuinely extremely happy with the way her hair looks.
Cool. So this really nicely leads us into the next point, actually. And before I get into that, which I'm going to talk about is the brand room in the brain. These two celebrity posts, the thing that was super interesting for us when we were thinking about it from the brain's point of view, is the reason they really stood out as working quite well, to Ian's point, doesn't really rely on them being celebrities or not. It's the way that the content has been produced. Now, our brains actually don't like brands. Our brains hate brands. They like stories. Our brains make meaning of life through stories and make sense of the world around us through stories. And what John Boyega does really well in the video is he tells stories. We've done some interesting work with Twitter as well, where we've looked at how to optimize video content on that platform. And with the work we've done on TV, with the work we've done on radio, we know that narrative and dialogue and directly addressing audiences is a really powerful mechanism to get the brain engaged, because the brain then feels like it's part of the story. Again, with Vogue Williams, you know, the bright colours, the facial expression of enjoyment, it's telling a story, it's telling a narrative, even though it's a static image, as opposed to some of the others that we saw where the branding was very overt. Now, the reason that that doesn't work as well is that we have a part of the front of our brain called the orbitofrontal cortex, which essentially acts as an ad blocker. It's something that develops when you're in your kind of late teens. It doesn't exist when we're kids. It's the reason we believe in Santa and Tooth Fairy and stuff. But it allows us to essentially take in the world when it's not there, and it allows us to assess risk as we grow up and that part of our brain develops. So in addition to assessing risk, it also doesn't like being sold to, and that's where really heavy overt branding can cause an issue. And these two celebrity bits of content are beautiful in that they don't really overtly sell. Now, we do use an analogy, and this should also help with one of the questions around media, perhaps thinking of it in a different way. The way we talk about our brains is we talk about our brains having these little rooms inside them. So we all have little branded spaces in our heads, and those little rooms are there to kind of build up essentially brand equity, because our brains build by association. And so when we have brand experiences, those experiences help to furnish that brand room. So if you have good experiences with a brand, your brand room will be beautifully furnished. If you have bad ones, it'll be hideous. Equally, if you have no experiences with a brand, just a random brand name, then that room would be empty, because, as I said, our brains build by association. So different media touch points play very different roles when it comes to the brand rooms in our brains. But we don't walk around all day thinking about brands. If we did, we'd get nothing done. So those rooms in our heads are often in darkness until something comes and switches on the light. So different media play different roles in our brand rooms. Some media can either be brand room furnishers, and other things can be light switches. Now, in the work that we've done, we've seen that TV obviously works very well as a brand room furnisher. You know, it's long form content that has all the equity cues that a brand would have in order to build those associations. Something like direct mail, because you're interacting with it, it may have your name, address, there's quality of paper and feel, there's imagery. That also can act as a brand room furnisher. Out of home's an interesting one, because the work we've just recently done, some work which is being published with JC Clear Channel and Posterscope, where we found that, yes, out of home, we knew this already from work we've done with Ocean Outdoor, out of home is an incredible brand room furnisher, but now with these added dynamic triggers that we can put into out of home content, it can also be a great light switch. Things like Twitter and Facebook, very much light switches. You know, advertising is incredibly intrusive in those platforms. It kind of gets in the way of what you're there to do. It flashes up quite quickly. So it's definitely more of a trigger, a light switch. Now, Instagram kind of breaks the rules when it comes to social media. It's a very visual medium. So it acts more as a furnisher than a light switch, which is what we'd originally thought it might do, because it's social media, which is often just a trigger. So it's another way of thinking about the media mix. Is your media a brand room furnisher, or is it a light switch? So I'm going to hand over to Ian again now. He's just going to take us through the final couple of slides for our key takeaways.
Thanks, Shazia. So guys, to wrap up, key takeaways. Influencer ads are a lot more emotive and memorable than TV, Facebook and YouTube ads when done well. And when done well, I mean when done creatively and authentically. Influencer also has a really interesting priming effect, which significantly improves responses to TV, YouTube and Facebook. So priming first, seeing that influencer ad prior to seeing the TV ad is going to improve your response to that TV ad. And celebrity ads tend to drive negative emotions and memories, but if they're used well, they can be really, really effective. And just to give you guys a bit of a sneak peek as to what we're doing now with all this stuff, this isn't just a one-off research piece which we're doing, putting on a shelf and admiring. We learned absolutely loads from this study. Like we've only really scratched the surface with this very short webinar as to all the detail and cool insight that we generated as part of the study. So what we're doing is taking what we've learned and applying that to our measurement going forward. So in terms of where there's measurement and how we're going to be measuring campaigns, we've done stage one. We have access to the Graph API. We have all those basic fundamental metrics. Now moving forward, we've just launched actually brand uplift reports on organic influencer marketing and also creative reports as well, where we're taking individual pieces of creative and understanding their emotional response and understanding all the other brand metrics that brands care about as well around purchase intent, brand recall, all that cool stuff. And we're rolling these out across all of our campaigns. So in addition to the fundamental metrics, you guys are getting a lot more around the various metrics which are indicative of people taking actions and that concept having an effect in different parts of the funnel, which is absolutely key with that influence management. So that's it. That concludes today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how much time we have for questions. I know we've kind of overrun a little bit, but we're happy to sit around for a bit if you guys have anything more you'd like to ask.
Interesting presentation. I appreciate you also answering the questions as we went. It seemed to be quite a good idea as opposed to leaving to the end, because they were particularly pertinent as we went through. So I think people appreciated that, which does mean that we haven't got any questions stored up now. There is just one I wanted to ask, and it's only slightly related, but I just wondered, in the new rules of paid online influencers, and specifically social media influencers, having to highlight the fact that adverts are paid for, or their posts are paid for, has that had any decline on the effectiveness of any of the campaigns, or is that not something you've looked at?
No, it's absolutely something to look at, and again, it's fundamental. So on an organic post, if one of our influencers is posting about something that they've been paid for, or if they've been gifted a product that they're talking about, we require that they use #ad or #sponsored. So that occurs across all of our posts. But honestly, there's really no impact on emotions and purchase intent, of the use of those hashtags. Like, people are following influencers because they like what the influencer talked about. They buy into their values and their personality, and as long as they understand that influencers are making a living by selling stuff, as long as the influencer behaves authentically and posts ads for stuff that they genuinely think will have a positive impact on their followers' lives, then actually followers really like it. They're like, she gets me. I personally feel very related. This is why personal relevance is a really interesting metric we didn't even touch on today, but as part of the study we measured personal relevance. These followers really feel that their influencers get them, that they're connected to them. So when they recommend a product, it's like their friend recommending a product. That said, they can be done in a really crap way, or crass way, like where an influencer is clearly just on the take and making a quick buck and doesn't really care about their followers. So, certain influencers will promote one product one week and then a competitor the next, and that is going on. There's absolutely no doubt about it, and that's why influencers can have a bad name in certain circles, because there's a lot of short-termist. There's many taking a short-termist approach to influencer marketing. That's why we'd recommend working with someone like us, obviously, but we select influencers based on their values and their creativity to ensure that doesn't happen. So when they do post an ad and use #ad, it has a strong effect, and people actually want to consider buying. Yeah, exactly. It's all about credibility and authenticity.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you both for the full presentation. It's very much appreciated, and I hope that you were happy to do it, and we look forward to hearing from you again next time you've got something exciting to talk to us about. We're open to repeat people coming along and giving us all of the new stuff for our members. So thank you very much to both of you. I know, Shazia, you've been before as well, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
And can I just remind everybody that our next webinar is on the 22nd of April, and that's with Sky, talking about embedding a segmentation. And as I'm sure you're all aware, you can sign up using the website. So if you do that, and then in the next couple of days, there'll be some Aura communications coming out regarding the 29th remote seminar in the place of our usual RAF Club event. So keep your eyes out for that, and we'll be in touch very shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.